romance, love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 19. Eagerness of a Listener. Hello, husband.
Hello, my little friend.
Friend-zoned.
I know, give me credit. I could have easily done it in the Scarface voice.
Oh,
I did not.
Yeah, well, we didn't. That's not necessary.
Too much of a... But I will say that I sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, maybe a lot of times, I do wish I were in a quiet island with only you.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So,
I feel the same.
Chapter 19.
Yes.
Halfway through the book.
We are halfway through the book. I can't believe it. It does seem like it's gone by pretty fast.
Yeah, I feel like we just started it, but yeah, we thought about it the other day, and I'm sure we were doing this show in October of last year. And
yeah.
Now it's already February, and we're like, oh, that's right. We are still halfway through the book.
Yeah, and well, I'm so glad that we've stuck to it and been putting out episodes every week. It's been a lot of fun to gather around the table on Mondays as we usually do.
Yeah. So how does SparkNotes summarize Chapter 19, Charlie?
Jane goes into the library to have her fortune read, and after overcoming her skepticism, she finds herself entranced by the old woman's speech. The gypsy woman seems to know a great deal about Jane and tells her that she is very close to happiness. She also says that she told Blanche Ingram that Rochester was not as wealthy as he seemed, thereby accounting for Blanche's sullen mood. As the woman reads Jane's fortune, her voice slowly deepens, and Jane realizes that the gypsy is Rochester in disguise. Jane reproaches Rochester for tricking her and remembers thinking that Grace Poole might have been the gypsy. When Rochester learns that Mr. Mason has arrived, he looks troubled.
Mystery grows with Mason.
Yes.
But the gypsy, who could the gypsy be?
This chapter is just surrounding the gypsy and this conversation that she or he has with Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And Jane here, I like that she is very sensible in this chapter because she's not thinking about Rochester as much. She's not struggling with her emotions and how to overcome her feelings. She's in control.
Yeah, I was surprised by that as well. Like you said, in the previous chapter, she was just kind of going on and on about how Rochester was meant for her and Blanche wasn't, and he's not part of their kind, and yet here she is talking to the gypsy. Unless she just doesn't want to, spill the beans, doesn't want to share personal
with
details
this unknown woman. No.
Yeah. And like I said, we know how passionate Jane is, so I'm surprised she wasn't so open with the gypsy. But like I said, maybe it's a Victorian era women.
Well, she's guarding her heart very, very closely, and I don't blame her. I feel like this is not something that you really want to share because it's not something that the gypsy would probably just laugh at her and like, oh, you're in love with the master of the house, but nothing's going to come of it. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
Except then you take off the clothes and it's the master of the house.
But yeah, at the same time, it is, like I said, I think we mentioned it in the last chapter that it is a little bit awkward where all of a sudden there's like, oh, there's gypsy here.
Yeah.
And so maybe it was sort of like you said, maybe she's more guarded and didn't want to go too deep into details.
Yeah. I mean, she does seem like she thinks that this is not right. Something's not right.
Yeah.
That she thinks that this woman is something of a masquerade is going on here, and she's not sure of who she is. Like the SparkNote summary said, it might have been Grace Poole, which would have been even weirder.
Yeah.
Grace Poole, the servant, is just or unless she just needs a little extra money, she's pretending to be a gypsy woman.
So when you're reading it on the page, it's kind of hard to try to determine when does Jane figure it out that it's Rochester.
That's true.
Because the SparkNote summary mentioned his voice got deeper. I don't remember. Does Charlotte describe his voice getting deeper?
I mean, in a way, just his voice changing, I think.
Yeah. I feel like
it's not as noticeable. I feel like the transition.
I feel like it's only brought up. Jane says something about she recognizes the hands.
Yeah.
And then, even before, I was wondering, because before she mentions that there's like a ring on the finger, and that's when she knows, okay, it's Rochester. But then I'm like, when she's talking about the hands, I'm like, what, she could tell they were a man's hands?
Or they weren't as withered like an old woman's hands or something.
True. They were a 38-year-old's hands.
Yeah. This is a very popular novel at the time. And I find it intriguing that there's a scene where there's a man dressing up as a woman, pretending to be someone that he's not, just to find out what the person he's in love with is thinking.
Is he in love with her?
What now?
Is Rochester, we established that he's like in love? I feel like he's got some passions, but that's another question.
Are you serious?
That's a whole
Is this a serious question?
Well, I mean, no. I'm not saying that he's not in love with her. I'm just saying, like, I feel like Jane has expressed her love, but we don't really heard from Rochester. All we've had is that one little moment after the fire.
Okay.
I don't know that he's ever really said love, right? He hasn't used that term.
It's, I feel that reading it, especially, maybe the first time I read it, I didn't quite pick up on this, but when you read it now, it feels like Charlotte Bronte is dropping a lot of hints that Rochester is feeling the same way. Things that he's telling her right now in this chapter just points to it even more, that he has feelings for Jane, and he wants to know what Jane is thinking. But
yeah, were they as strong as Jane's? Who knows? But yeah, like I don't think it's as weird that a male protagonist dressed up as a woman. I think it's weird that it's a gypsy, not just any woman. It's like a gypsy, like I said, a charade with a fortune teller. But I feel like there's some cleverness to it, because in any kind of a romance, whether it be a novel or a romantic comedy film, like, it's hard for the characters to find out for themselves if the other person likes them. Yeah. And like, as we've mentioned with Jane, she's so kind of guarded with her feelings. She, you're reading these chapters and she's talking about how crazy she is about Rochester, but it's all inner monologues.
Yes.
And so we're finding, like, if she had the opportunity to talk to Rochester this way, would she? Would she be too nervous to do so? And so I don't want to say his credit, I guess, that he's trying to figure that out without just coming out and saying, "Are you in love with me, Jane?" and putting her on the spot. And so, he finds a clever way to do it, and I'm not going to fault him for that. He has a little fun. He lives in this big house. There's only so much he can do, for entertainment. And so he's come up with the whole charades game. Right? And so this is just like a natural progression of that.
But isn't that a sign that he is in love with her? That he's so desperate to know what she's thinking?
Again, I'm not denying that he doesn't have feelings for her. It's this idea of the word love. Love is a very strong word, and I feel like that's something that I don't know if it develops fast enough in him. It seems to be developing in her because this novel is told from the first person, right? Whereas we don't know what Rochester thinks. We only know what he's telling us. And and the only thing he's told us is that little, what do you want to call it, soliloquy or whatever after the fire, where he seems to really be fond of her and really seems to like her, right? But I don't know that he's ever, I don't know.
I guess the dialogue that happens in this chapter is not enough to you to indicate that he is.
I don't see it. I feel like we're 19 chapters in, and I still don't think. It's not that I don't think he's in love with her, but it just doesn't feel like he's
obsessed with her.
I feel like there's still the feelings are still developing.
Oh,
and that's what I'm waiting to see. Well, I feel like if you were to judge it on a scale of 1 to 100 or something, Jane's feelings are higher.
Oh,
Jane is more in love with him than he is with her at this moment.
Even though I feel that in this chapter you get a sense that Rochester has studied Jane very closely, that he understands how she thinks pretty well, and that indicates to me that if he's studying her that closely, that maybe he's a little obsessed the way that Jane has been watching Rochester in the previous chapter.
Yeah, I feel like, again, it's just, I feel he has feelings for her. But I'm talking about love. And I feel like the only reason we know Jane is in love with Rochester at this point is because she has gone on and on and on with this, like I said, these inner monologues about it, which we have not gotten from Rochester. So we really don't know. We're almost in Jane's position to where...
Okay, I could see that. True, I have thought about, this book a lot, and obviously that now that I've read it multiple times, that it colors the way I think of all the previous chapters, knowing what's going to come.
Exactly.
So
people, you're fast forwarding the romance too quickly, romanticizing this book. He's like I said, he's a stuffy, stoic Victorian era Byronic hero, landowner, master of the house. You know, he'll get there. I just don't think. I think right now he's still feeling, and that's why he does this scene because he's kind of starting to like her, right?
Okay.
And because the only person she's told is the reader, right? She has not told anybody else how she feels about him. So this is his opportunity to kind of see if she'll slip up and say something. And unfortunately, she's a little too, as we say, guarded again. There's that word again.
Yeah.
Because
she's not going to slip up easily.
Yeah, the gypsy thing didn't quite work.
No.
Because he's I think I said, he seems like he's afraid she won't tell him straight up. So he's like, I'll put on this ruse, and that's not really seem to be working either.
Well, okay, about this ruse then. Let's go back to I think the secondary reason why Rochester dresses up as a gypsy is so that he can plant a seed of doubt in Blanche, so that she will break up with him by the fact that he'll tell Blanche, Rochester doesn't have as much money as you think. He's actually not. He's not doing too well, and that's it. And then that would make Blanche think, you know what, I don't want to marry him now.
Well, and I pose this question to you as well: is do you think he doesn't want her?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, again, I feel like sometimes you have this idea of how this is supposed to happen because you know how it ends already.
Sure.
And it's more romantic if he ends up with Jane.
But see, I know how it ends, so now I go back into the book and see how Charlotte builds that story so that it makes sense, right? Like you're not going to get a scene where Rochester's like, oh, maybe Blanche, maybe I don't like Blanche as much as I thought, because he never liked Blanche at all. So if there was that scene, then I would think, oh yeah, maybe he had really considered it.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it to you before. We don't know their relationship. We only know what Jane sees. Like, they obviously knew each other before Jane ever entered the picture. But
then in the previous chapter, Jane sees that Blanche is really disappointed. She seems upset by what the gypsy said.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not talking about that. That's
okay.
I'm talking about.
You know that Blanche is trying to get money. She wants to marry Rochester for his money.
Okay. Sure. Like, I mean.
No, that's not established.
Well, I mean, not until this moment.
Sure.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
And I feel like, but then it's I don't know if it's disingenuous or whatever to say that, like, well, Rochester's trying to make her less interested. I think he was testing her, and she failed.
Oh.
You know, because I think for all we know, again, all we know is what Jane sees. And what does Jane see? They seem to be okay whenever they go off on horseback. They're always together. When they do the charade, when they're holding hands in the charade scene.
I mean, as a married couple, they're getting married.
When they were sitting and watching the other, or there was, I thought there was something about where they were sitting and watching, and they were holding hands or something.
Okay, maybe.
But and then when they do the scene, they're playful, you know. And then the whole part where when Blanche is complaining about the governesses, and Roger's like, play some music for me, and you're going to sing a song for me, and it's like, okay, maybe that's how Victorian era couples behaved, or when they were interested.
Okay.
Like, I don't necessarily think that Rochester has fallen head over heels with Jane, and now he's trying to push Blanche out of the picture. I think it's something you and I always talked to about, which is the idea of options. He obviously does have feelings for Jane, but he doesn't know how she feels back, right? He feels that maybe Blanche likes him. I assume, I'm assuming he probably figures Blanche does like him a lot.
Maybe him in what way?
Well, I mean, it would be interested in marrying him, right?
But she's not in love with him.
Yeah, but like we said, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily preclude a marriage in this era, right? Yeah. And so this is his opportunity to say, like, you know, Jane talked about how you don't marry anybody unless you're in love with them, and whereas I think Rochester's trying to figure that out, because if he tells Blanche he's not, as the gypsy, you know, Rochester doesn't have that much money, and she's like, well, that's fine, I you know. That's his opportunity. Once again, just like he did with Jane, he can find out what Blanche is really thinking by pretending to be this gypsy. And so, again, she failed the test. I don't think he did that on purpose. Well, if I tell her I don't have money, she's clearly going to run away from me, and now I'll have Jane all to myself.
That is what I think.
See, that's what you think. No. I still think it's his opportunity to be like, okay, is that all you care about? Let me put it to her,
all
and
right.
he would maybe he suspected that, and his suspicions were proven to be true.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Well, that was another discussion that will be tabled for now. We're gonna have to revisit that once we get more information in the next chapters.
Because I wonder, like, what would have happened if Blanche would have been like, "That's fine."
Oh,
then Rochester would have been like, "Oh, okay."
Well, I think Rochester's a pretty good judge of character, and he already knows what Blanche would have done, so that's why he does this.
Okay.
Did you like my charade? Was it well carried out?
Well, you managed very well with the other ladies.
But not with you.
No. You did not act the character of a gypsy with me.
Did I not? Whose then? My own?
Oh, no. Some unaccountable one.
And the others, what did they say about me?
That you knew everything about them, which of course you do.
And Miss Ingram, what did she say?
Rochester has given Jane his analysis of her now as a gypsy, and through that, he does, I feel, break a little bit of his control, and his emotions get away from him, and he says some things that he probably didn't mean to say, and it gives the reader, I think, an insight to what he's thinking and how he thinks that Jane will react to certain, like, adversity or something. So...
I mean, his passion is really starting to show through, right?
Yes.
I just said that I wasn't sure if he loved her, but we've seen that he's clearly studied her, right? This is his opportunity to kind of unveil to Jane what he's seen of Jane, even though she doesn't know because he's a gypsy, right? You know, so maybe the feelings are towards love, as we said.
And then he, once Jane knows that Rochester is a gypsy, then Jane tries to leave, and he's like, "Oh, they don't know I'm here. Let's just hang out a little bit."
I like that part of the scene.
Yeah.
I wish we got to see more of that. They finally have a moment alone together, right? Because I feel like every other time it's just in passing, or that's, the Dell's in the corner.
True.
Or Jane wants to get back to her room, and he can't come up with a pet name for her, But yeah, and it's like you said, and then that moment when he's trying to take off the gypsy cloak or whatever, and then he's just like, "Hey, Jane, help me."
Yeah, the string is a knot, and Jane's like, break it. I'm not gonna help. I'm not gonna get close to you.
Show me how strong you are, a big strong man.
Yeah, that's a cute moment, because I feel like that shows that Rochester wants Jane to get a little close to him. Yeah,
and what I like about it is the way I read it, because as we're going to get into here in a few minutes when we talk about the different adaptations of this scene, the different ways you could play this scene, the way I read it, the way that Charlotte wrote it, is that it feels like Jane doesn't seem to mind the ruse.
Yeah.
She's just so much more happy to see him than she is upset about the ruse. And I know you asked a minute ago, like, is it weird that a male protagonist would dress up like a woman? But it's like, Jane doesn't seem to mind.
She takes it in stride. She doesn't think, oh, that is really weird.
And she also knows that she now has as much time as she wants with him, because no one's going to come interrupt them. More than likely, because they're assuming she's getting her fortune read. And so now they kind of have, and that's why it's a little bit hard pressed when the subject of Mr. Mason comes up, because now the subject or the tone of the conversation changes.
Yeah.
Because it's like this really romantic moment, and then all of a sudden she just very flippantly in passing, "Oh yeah, Mr. Mason's here," and all of a sudden, what? Him? From Spanish Town in the West Indies? Right?
Yeah, we get that. Like, get back to that mystery. No more romance. I mean, we had a lot of romance in this chapter, so now we have to see the effect that Mr. Mason has on Rochester, which only makes the reader more confused about why he should be so upset. Yeah.
And I said it makes the mystery a little bit more intriguing, I think we talked about it in the last episode. I didn't think it was so weird that he was there. Yeah, he didn't say himself. He didn't tell Rochester he was coming. But yeah, he's there, and and I think the Spark Note summary from the last chapter was like, Jane thinks he's strange or something.
Yes.
It's like, no, he's just there. And then but then when you see Rochester's face change, and all of a sudden, okay, now here's more of the mystery. Rochester's clearly nervous about his presence being there.
Jane is right to be a little upset or a little confused about Mr. Mason and why he's there.
And that's what I kind of like. It's what makes this book so good, is that right when you're starting to get, I mean, we've talked about it earlier, but like there's a lot of mystery, the gothic parts of this romance novel, where it's not just, hey, I'm crazy about him, is he crazy about me? We've got all this stuff going on with what are these noises we keep hearing. And then now we get just a little bit of one more little element. Kind of peel back the onion, right? In layers. We get one little thing. This other guy shows up. Okay, who is he? Well, let's slowly spread this out over a couple of chapters, right?
Yeah.
He's just hanging out at the house. He's just talking to Colonel Dent about some war stories.
Yeah.
He doesn't, he's just there. And so now, But at the same time, I also feel like it takes a little bit away because we were going in a really nice path with sort of the romance aspects of it.
Well, it's also a little difficult because Jane is not going to declare herself, and I also think that she might be a little bit nervous about being alone with Rochester because she's not sure what she's going to say or how she's going to act. So that's why she's like, "Oh, Mr. Mason, something to change the subject."
Yeah. Mr. Mason's here. Mr. Mason. Have you heard of this guy, Mr. Mason? Spanish Town. But and this is to Charlotte's credit, is that rather than just proceeding as like, okay, now we're just going to have this romance. She's like, nope. Might be an impediment.
Pull back.
For lack of a better word, I'll just say it might be an impediment. But but I did like I said, just to go back, because that moment ends the chapter, and I believe, without reading ahead, I think the next chapter is basically going to be mostly about the Mason stuff. But it's a shame because I wanted that moment the moment before she mentions Mason, I wanted that to go on a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Because he's put up this whole elaborate ruse. The Gypsy scene goes on for several pages and long passages of dialogue. Like I said, the adaptations, they don't bother to include all of it.
That's too much, yeah.
It's just too much. Okay. And especially I think when she first walks in and she points out that, oh yeah, the Gypsy's not even looking at me. It's like, okay. I mean, I guess it's just extra scene building. Yeah. But I like, the film moment finally ends. And then there's a great line where after she tells Mason she tells him Mason is here, and he says, "Jane, you offered me your shoulder once before. Let me have it now." And so I feel like this is obvious. This is Rochester sort of ceding some power to her and revealing that he needs her help. Yeah, and that he's going to have to rely on her. And I think that would. That shifts that down. Even if he's not going to come out and say how his feelings are, and he's loving her, he loves her. That should give her some hope that I think I'm working my charms in the right direction, and I'm pulling him around. Yeah,
that's a great point. As Mike alluded to earlier, we did pull up some clips from adaptations tonight and watch them because the Gypsy scene in a lot of adaptations is eliminated. You don't get to see that moment. And, it's technically not important to the storytelling. It's just some more character building, some romance building. So you really see them in the miniseries adaptations, the long form.
It's one of those great moments from the miniseries.
Yeah.
I remember when you showed me all the adaptations, it was like, oh, we're finally going to get to see the Gypsy scene when we get to 1973. Yeah.
Definitely.
And can I say real quick, I was pleasantly surprised that a few years back, Charlene and I drove down to San Diego to see a live performance of Jane Eyre, and they served us tea and cookies and stuff. And they did the Gypsy scene. Yeah. Considering that they wanted to keep that show pretty condensed, I was pleasantly surprised they included the Gypsy scene in that performance. Yeah.
I mean, it is a great theatrical moment, so it's nice to see that scene and then see how it works into the romance, the structure of the romance. So we watched 3 adaptations, 3 miniseries, and starting with my favorite, the one that we use clips from in this podcast, the 1973 adaptation starring Sorcha, Cusack, and Michael Jayston. And for it being my favorite adaptation, it's a little disappointing how quickly this adaptation kind of goes through that scene. Like it kind of starts with Rochester analyzing Jane's features pretty quickly.
She's already sitting in front of the fire.
Yeah.
They cut right to the chase. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jane, I feel like Jane really knows that it's Rochester. You see a little smile on her face, and it's just cut short. But it's a very lighthearted scene. And I like how that plays out. Yeah, it's just not quite true to the book.
Yeah, I wish it could have gone on a little bit longer with the Gypsy part. Like you said, Jane does figure it out really quickly. She was happy to see him.
Very amused.
yeah. And then did you think I personally I didn't think that Michael Jayston's his voice or his accent was that convincing. Like I thought Jane could have figured it out fairly quickly. Well,
and I guess that's why maybe they did that.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder why maybe Blanche or the other girls who came in didn't figure it out, but
Well,
Jane is very
Jane's
observant.
One,
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like in the 1973 when we see Michael Jayston, a talented actor, by the way, good friend of the podcast. You see him asking for help. It's a little bit more romantic, but then, the scene goes on for a little while just with just those two. That's my favorite part of that scene is when they have that conversation afterwards. And I felt like that was almost left entirely intact.
Yes.
Up to the point where he makes himself a drink.
Yeah.
In the book, he has Jane go out and get him a drink. But I guess in the interest of time, let's cut it down. He makes himself the drink, and then they're talking for a while until he says, "Okay, go tell Mason that I'm here." And then what do you if everyone came in and spat on me, what would you do? Like that.
Yeah.
That goes on. So that's really true to the book. I like that part of the adaptation. Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't have too much bad things to say about this particular scene. Obviously, I'm biased, but now we get to the 1983 adaptation starring Zela Clark and Timothy Dalton.
Yeah.
And this one's a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's more unabridged. You really get a feel for the scene, right?
From as it is in the book. Right?
Yeah, when she walks in, she gets the whole conversation with the gypsy. And the gypsy before he starts to analyze her. We get more of the
and Jane is more wary. She looks like she's a little bit trying to figure out who this person is or why she's there.
Yeah, and I think to his credit, I'm a big fan of Timothy Dalton. I like him as James Bond. I love him in Hot Fuzz, but and Flash Gordon too. If you guys should go see that. His accent is really good. It's kind of like a Scottish brogue almost.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit more convincing to where maybe
you wouldn't
not
know.
Going to tell. And that's one of the differences I noticed between we watched these first two is that in the 73 one, Sorcha figures it out fairly quickly and then says, "Hey, that's you, Mr. Rochester," and he's like, "All right, it's me."
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, he gives up before Jane can tell him it's him.
Yeah.
And so I was surprised, and he doesn't ask for any help getting out of the costume, so you kind of lose a little bit of the romance there. And what? Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, I felt that Jane also showed that she was more angry.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
Sorcha was so pleasantly surprised to see him, whereas Zela Clark is more upset about the whole situation.
Which is very believable, I feel.
True. Well, somewhat.
Yeah.
Again, as I just said, it feels like with the way Charlotte wrote it, Jane is more excited to see him than she is upset about the ruse.
I feel it's more believable to be upset.
That's Charlene DeKalb's version of it. I would hope if I did that she would. I would get the Sorcha reaction, not the Zela reaction. And then, unfortunately, I mentioned one of my favorite parts of the 73 adaptation is the fact that that scene goes on with just the two of them, and they have a chance to kind of chat. Whereas the 83 version doesn't go on very long. They really kind of cut down that part after he's like, "Okay, it's me," and then she's like, "Hey, Mr. Mason's here."
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, "Okay, you got to go leave and go talk to him." So you
give up something, I guess.
Exactly, right? It's sort of a give and take.
Yeah.
73 one cuts the first part of it out, but then really plays up the second part, and you've got, like I said, two talented actors, and that's why it's the best adaptation. Whereas the 83 one, it plays up the first part of that scene, which is important, which is really great, but then it cuts down the second part of the scene, which is the romance, and it shows her upset, and so now you got to figure out, where is this going? You're getting back into the book where you're like, okay, now we're going to play up the romance, or we're going to play up the mystery. And it seems like the 73 version is playing up more of the romance. Sorcha's going to be his accomplice to help him, whereas the 83 one is more just like, Zela Clark is upset, and then she's like, now I got to go help you do something? Okay. Like, I feel like the love is kind of is played down a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. I feel that is very true to why 1973 does appeal to me more oftentimes.
But then, you get the 2006 one, which just blows them both out of the water as far as just taking its own liberties.
Yeah. So the 2006 one, starring Ruth Wilson and Toby Stephens, that one does something different. Rochester hires a woman to pretend to be a gypsy, and apparently he has told this woman a bunch of things about his guests.
That's what I was going to say. How does the gypsy know everything?
Was
it a real gypsy? My first thought was like, does she really know this, or does Rochester given her a script and fed it to her, right? Yeah.
I'm sure he's told her these things, because otherwise how would he know? The gypsy particularly says, "Oh, we went to Lowood," and that's, that pulls Jane out of it. She's a little bit unnerved by that.
Yeah.
And I can see why that would be unnerving, because in the chapter, Rochester doesn't go into such particulars. Like, it's very general.
Yeah, but did you notice, like, I I could picture the gypsy kind of like trying to remember her lines. Okay, she went to Longwood. All right, she's this, she's that. There's a Miss Temple. I will say, did you notice of the 3 adaptations, this is the only one in which we see Jane give a shilling to the gypsy?
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame.
Honest to the transaction.
It's a shame. It's the least effective of the 3 adaptations in doing this scene, but yet it has a couple of touches that are not in the other 2 adaptations. That's one. I'll tell you the other one in a minute.
Okay.
But I'm going to see if you spotted it as well.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a bigger flaw, which I would hope it might be the same. You have the same problem with it that I did.
Well, I don't know why.
Other than the fact that it's a made up character, but yeah.
I feel like it's more cruel of Rochester to hire a woman to come in and play the gypsy. It shows that he's, he was doing this, and it's more of a lark if it's him, dressing up. But the fact that he's bringing another woman in and he's having her, even though it would be more believable, because if he had done it himself, it might be that he would get caught by someone, and having an actual woman come in to do it, then he would be able to get away with it.
Yeah. If you haven't read the book and you just watched the 2006 adaptation, I could see there being some confusion.
Yeah.
And I could see like, okay, does he like her? I don't get it. Why would he?
That's true. You don't really get a sense of why he's. Well, you do get a sense because he'll tell you why he did it.
Yeah.
But you don't get the subtlety of the scene, really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest problem. The 2 biggest problems. The main problem I have is that it's all made up dialogue.
Yeah.
Like, when you're watching the 73 and 83, again, we just read the chapter. Every line of dialogue that they have between each other is like, okay, I remember that. That's it. That's in the book. Charlotte Bronte has written a very good source for you. Use it. And for some reason, in the 06 version, not only do they bring in a character who does not exist, but then all of the dialogue, majority of the dialogue between them is just completely fabricated. Yeah. It's completely made up. And it's written, I don't know, with all due respect to whoever wrote the adaptation, they went so far off of the incredible source material that it loses some of its power. Yeah. And then, like you said, the other part that I hated about it was there's absolutely no subtlety. Like, all the dialogue is completely overt. We're talking about, he does this because he wants to know how she feels. Well, in this 06 adaptation, he literally has to say, doesn't he say, like, what do you think of me? Yeah. Or something to that effect, where it was like, I don't remember his exact line, but it was something like, I had to do this to find out what you thought of me.
Yes, that's it. That's like, exactly what he said.
Come on. You're not mysterious. You're not Byronic, But what I thought was so funny, this is the only one of the 3 adaptations that includes the line where he says, I wish I was on a desert island with you.
Oh, I see.
And that's the most passionate line, as we've said. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's just ruined by the rest of the way this scene is set up, that for some reason, I don't know why Michael Jayston or Timothy Dalton didn't do it. Didn't have that line. But it's a shame. This is the one adaptation that includes it.
Well, I mean, the other thing I don't get is, like, right before she gets up to leave, the gypsy calls out to Rochester and says, is this it? What am I supposed to say? It was like, did Rochester want her to reveal that he's here? Because Jane is clearly in the room. Like, she'll hear this exchange.
And what's great, what's great in the other adaptations is, because of the book, this is the moment where they're having this great moment, and they're like, okay, now I pulled this ruse, but now I'm, Jane is happy to see me. Yeah. Again, Sorcha, let's look at Sorcha. Sorcha's really happy to see him. And then as soon as she says Mason, then all of a sudden his face changes. We bring the mystery back in. Mason isn't even mentioned in the 06 version. There's no sense of urgency. She comes into the room. She says, take that back. She says Mason is here. Yeah. But he doesn't tell her to go get Mason and tell him I'm here.
Sure.
She just leaves on her own.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, the whole point of this that thing is where he's now confiding in her, and he wants her trust, and he's like, can you do me a favor? Go out there and tell him I'm here, and then then we'll go from here. But he's just like, all right. She's like, Mason's here. Oh man, Mason's here. All right. And then he just ups and leaves.
Well, yeah. That's 06 version. It's just a different take. I mean, I guess, without how many adaptations there are, they want to do something different. Yeah. Sometimes it's successful, and sometimes it's nice to just stick with the book.
Yeah. All you need to know is 1973, you have Michael Jayston, who's the extremely talented actor, pretty much the best embodiment of Mr. Rochester, and this is the best adaptation. Timothy Dalton in 1983. Timothy Dalton is James Bond. 2006, Toby Stevens is James Bond villain.
Oh my goodness.
From one of the more forgettable James Bond films as well. If you're curious, if you're playing at home, that would be Die Another Day. So I'll take the James Bond over the James Bond villain. Well, as we always like to do, we'll end this episode with a meaningful passage or quote from the chapter that meant a lot to us. Charlene, it is your turn to go first. What have you got?
So this quote is part of the Gypsy's analysis of Jane. Reason sits firm and holds the reins, and she will not let the feelings burst away and hurry her to wild chasms. The passions may rage furiously like true heathens as they are, and the desires may imagine all sorts of vain things, but judgment shall still have the last word in every argument, and the casting vote in every decision.
Deep?
Yeah, and it's really builds the central issue for Jane's life of balancing reason and passion. And Rochester is just laying it all out here that, she may be overcome with her passionate feelings, but as he says, reason sits firm and holds the reins. And her sensibility is always going to guide her decisions. So, when you continue on in this story and the subsequent chapters, I think that interplay of Jane's passion and reason is going to be something to pay attention to. And it's an important part of this book and why I think the book really appeals to me, because, that's something that you probably feel a lot in your life, of trying to do the right thing and also trying to do what you want to do, and you're always going to have to balance that.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying before. This is Rochester has really studied her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Rochester we've said we know how passionate she is. Now she's weighing passion versus reason.
Yeah.
Now he must be figuring that out as well.
Yes.
If he's in Gypsy character, breaking this down and saying this right to her.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So what's your quote, Mike?
Well, just like you, I also had something from the interplay between the Gypsy and Jane. It does go on for the majority of the chapter.
Majority, yeah.
and there's a lot of really clever turns of phrase from the Gypsy. There's a lot of long monologues as well. But this one I found particularly poignant, just in the way that it's written. The description I have is probably pretty much the same as the way you felt about your quote. And she's talking about, when she starts guessing, when the Gypsy starts guessing what Jane is like, Jane's just like, oh, that could be anyone. That's it,
Yeah.
And I could find you another person that has, I live in this big house. Of course you think that's, that's an easy guess to make. and then after we get back and forth with that, the Gypsy basically is trying to tell Jane that she's actually in a very good spot. And she says, if you knew it, you are peculiarly situated, very near happiness. Yes, within reach of it. The materials are all prepared. There only wants a movement to combine them. Chance laid them somewhat apart. Let them be once approached, and bliss results. And so I feel like that's something. The term bliss comes up a lot. I will tell, to shine a window into our lives, is that a lot of times when I'm having a really, really wonderful night with Charlene, I will say, this is bliss. And so I feel like this is Rochester telling Jane, hey, calm down. It's okay.
Yeah.
You've got something right in front of you. Maybe he is falling in love with her.
Yeah, well, what do you think he's referring to?
He's basically saying there's a good thing here. Just be patient and let it sort itself out. Let me pretend that I got no money so that Blanche will be uninterested.
Blanche, get away from me.
But yeah, I thought that was kind of poignant because, like you said, Jane's very combative in this scene, right? She doesn't want to reveal too much.
Yes.
And Rochester's basically trying to say, like, oh, yeah, don't worry, it's all good. It's just, you just wait patiently, and there's some opportunities in front of you if you just let it play out.
He's always hinting and dropping references that she doesn't get.
Yeah, he's twice her age. What do you expect? I think we talked a little bit longer than I was expecting for such a chapter that's pretty, condensed.
Right. But there's just a lot of words to unpack, a lot of dialogue that we're analyzing. We're analyzing like Rochester is analyzing Jane.
Exactly. Now when we begin the second half of the novel, we go back into the mystery.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AirGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.